I was like 15 and I got a volunteer position at a hospital. Even though it wasn't a paid job, there's a pretty big application process. But I needed to choose something in order to complete a program at my high school. It was one of those honors types programs. One of those things that get you to stress out over AP exams and a ton of homework. We learned things like gardening and how to use cool software. I'm not really sure what I was doing there since I wasn't particularly smart, but I was still being pushed to go into the medical field. Maybe to be a doctor or something. I still don't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to volunteer at a hospital in order to put it on my college applications. It was at a Kaiser Permanente hospital. I figured since it was pretty big and more official sounding than going to volunteer at a smaller clinic would mean more. I don't know. It was a strange time for me. I chose the pediatrics department over the gift shop, but there were other things you could choose too. My job was just to go around and talk to the kids or invite them to play in the playroom, or just lug around the video game systems from room to room. Our office, the one for volunteers, was in the parking garage of the hospital. A musky little thing with the smell of stale bread and coffee, stacks and stacks of papers everywhere, and pictures of the awards of the many volunteers that had been there probably for decades. Since the pediatrics department was on the 8th floor of the hospital, and the parking lot required you to go to the first floor, then around the building, and then to the office, I usually skipped the little break I would get, or would go to the hospital food in the cafeteria in the basement. It was open all the time, but hot food would be served only at specific times, while the others were just cold deli sandwiches, instant noodles, and snacks from a huge selection of vending machines. I still had to go to the office at night to sign out, though. I'd be there for 4 hours on Tuesdays, from 4:30 to 8:30 at night. One of the other volunteers that showed up during my shift said that we could just sign in and out at the same time, so that way we had to just make one trip. The evening people tended to do that, so I figured it was okay for me too. Tuesdays were typically empty days at the department, and even though it's a good thing to not have patients on the floor, the shift was always pretty boring. I had gotten there an hour late that evening because of a school project, around 5:30 p.m., so I would technically have to stay until 9:30 p.m. Even though I contemplated leaving early, I ended up staying the full 4 hours. Another reason was that I had asked my dad to pick me up at 9:30 p.m., so I had no choice. Either I took the 40-minute walk home, or I just waited to get picked up. It was 9:15, and I decided to start getting ready to leave. So I got my stuff together, cleaned up the playroom, and went for the elevator. There aren't that many people in the hospital at night, and the hallways all have motion sensors, so the place is dark until you walk up to a certain area. Just when I was leaving the elevator on the first floor, I saw the clipboard a nurse was holding, and I remembered that I still had to go sign in and out at the volunteer office in the parking garage. It was supposed to be something completely normal, but something definitely felt off from the start. Being there that late, with even less people and cars, made the area creepier. Once I got to the office and tried to pull open the door, it wouldn't open. The coordinator had left, and nobody was in there. I was told that when I had to get into the volunteer office, I was supposed to get the security guard and that she'd open it. So I had to do the diagonal walk through the first floor of the parking building to get to the security office. One area of the overhead lights was off, like it wasn't working. It wasn't flickering, but you could tell that it was trying to turn back on with a faint, bluish purple light. It was right in the middle of the parking floor, and it caused a big dark spot right in the middle. Right across from it was the security office. I could see that the lights inside the office were on, but the door was shut. Now I know that in cases like these you can just leave a note or let someone know that you couldn't find your way into the office to sign out. But then they'd also know that I hadn't signed in either. I really didn't want to get in trouble. So I tried to walk as fast as I could. My footsteps echoed, and I could also hear the echoes of the cars on the street next to the building. The dark area was right in front of me, but I figured I should just keep my eyes on the security office door and ignore the darkness. But I couldn't help it. I kept imagining things, from rats in the dark lot to someone hiding in the columns. I could feel myself panicking a little when suddenly someone tugged at my sleeve. And when they did, they also pinched part of my arm. I thought it might have been some other volunteer or someone trying to play a joke on me. I turned around, scared as heck, but trying to seem okay with it, ready to laugh if it was someone joking with me. But as I turned around, I felt it tugging at my sleeve of my jacket again. This was one of those windbreaker jackets that make noise when you touch them. So I heard it and felt the sleeve tighten around my arm. But there was nobody there. That's when I ran as fast as I could toward the security office and knocked on the door, looking back as often as I could to see if I spotted anybody hiding there. That's when two people, the guards, turned the corner of the basement staircase coming up to the office. The younger guy had the keys in his hand, and he looked at me with a look of, "What are you doing here?" While Beatrice, the older security guard that I had met when I first started, smiled at me, trying to figure out what was wrong by just looking at me. I think the other guy had just started since I had never seen him before. "Honey, is everything okay?" she asked. For the first time in my life, I couldn't get words out of my mouth. My face felt cold, and my vision was going a little sideways. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it right on my neck, under my ears. I finally managed to get out that I needed to get to the volunteer office to sign out. As she went inside the office to grab her jacket, he introduced me to the new guy, yelling the introduction from under her desk as she picked up the black jacket off the floor. I apologized for my freak out, and then I told him, trying to laugh a little bit, that someone had tugged at my sleeve. She poked her head out as she looked out her door toward me, and then looked at the new guard. They both stood there looking at each other until the new guy spoke up. "Is that what you were talking about, Mrs. Smith?" I guess that's how he referred to Beatrice. Had they experienced this also? Beatrice told him they'd check later, and she nodded at me to start making my way back to the volunteer office. He walked along until I finally asked what they meant before. Beatrice told me that I wasn't the first person to say something like that. We got to the office, I signed in and out, and then thanked them as I ran to the entrance of the hospital where my dad was probably already waiting for me. The following week, the volunteer coordinator left a note on the sign-in sheet for me to see Beatrice before starting. I thought that maybe she had told someone about me signing in and out at the same time. When I got up to the office, Beatrice stood up and put her granola bar down, asking me to take a seat and to look at the laptop in front of her. She had gone through the security camera the night of my incident. On the footage, I came from the top right corner of the screen and walked diagonally toward the bottom left side, which had more light. The camera was above the security office. As I walked through the dark patch, you could see the light behind me flicker and shut off and turn back on just as I turned around, likely after I felt the tugging at my sleeve. I looked at Beatrice to say something when she pointed back at the screen. "Look," she said. From the footage, I could see that I had stopped walking and then started running. Yes, I saw myself running, nearly tripping over myself. "No," she said, "look at it again." And then I saw what she meant. Just as I turned away, there was another person running away from me, wearing the exact same jacket as me, the same shoes. We both ran away from each other. The other me disappeared off the camera frame. Beatrice said she looked at some of the other security cameras and noticed only a glitch around that same time, but nothing that would signal that somebody had actually been there. Beatrice told me that she warned the other guards about double-checking their 20s or locations, since a few times Beatrice herself has shown up in 2 cameras at once. They said it was some type of error with the camera system, but Beatrice had also experienced something similar to me. Her words were still on my mind when I got up to the 8th floor. I pressed the security button to be led into the department by the nurse on duty. As I walked toward her desk, she smiled and said, "Hey, when'd you leave?" I gave her a confused look. Then she said, "Never mind, I thought I had seen you in here already. Sorry, it's been a long shift." I was 8 or 9 years old when this happened. Here in Houston, we get intense rain sometimes, and I think I got used to sleeping in noisy environments. My older sisters used to watch movies or play video games late at night. My parents' bedroom was all the way at the back of the house, so they probably slept fine too. It didn't seem to bother them too much. We used to live in a typical suburban home. Nothing fancy, but definitely an upgrade from where we used to live. Overall, I'd consider my childhood very typical for someone in my generation. One night, I was playing a game on my Game Boy. I think I had just gotten Donkey Kong, and I was very excited to play it. But I ended up falling asleep at some point. In the distance, I could hear the rumbling of the movie my sisters were watching. I thought I could also hear raindrops against my window. But then, everything changed. Suddenly, I was under a tree. I could look up and see the branches of it. I could see several other kids my age playing around in the distance. But one girl really stood out. She was running away from a man who kept telling her not to run. The scene came into view almost like in a movie. First, I noticed the swings, then the monkey bars over a big sandbox. We were in a park. The bright yellow dress that the girl was wearing, with a big stain in the middle of it, was what stood out the most in that dream. She was panicked, yelling and calling out for her mom. All of that was happening right in front of me, while I just stood there and watched. I could find no other way to explain that dream, but it kept coming back. Sometimes I'd go a whole week without dreaming at all, and then I'd get the same dream again. And every single time, I'd see the little girl run in fear from this man who was chasing her. All I could do was just stand there and watch. Sometimes the dream would go a little longer, and I'd just see the girl make her way toward the parking lot, while the man speed walked toward her. And yet all I could do was just stand there and watch. The dream stopped for a while, like pretty much all through middle school. But then they started coming back in a different way. Throughout my dreams, I'd hear my name, clearly. Elizabeth, Elizabeth. Louder and louder, like somebody was trying to wake me up. Eventually, I'd hear my name so suddenly and loudly that I would open my eyes wide, right then and there, waiting for it again. I would say it happened about once or twice per month. I'd wake up around 5 in the morning to the sudden loud sound of my dad calling it. I wasn't sure if it had always been him, but I remember that clear, deep sound of his voice, his accent, his sense of urgency. Elizabeth. I explained this to my dad, and he said that he had a similar dream when he yelled out my name, and that maybe we were communicating in our dreams. I found it a little hard to believe, but I told them that was probably it. The dream stopped for a while again, and I was in high school when they started once more. My dad yelling out my name and the sound of his voice, muffled by the glass of a car door. Then knocking and more yelling. I'd wake up feeling scared and confused. The same thing happened for several months. Then they changed again. I could hear myself crying, my dad knocking on the window, and then suddenly the sound of breaking glass as I looked up to him from the back of a hatchback car, like a minivan or something. He would be telling me to move my head and cover my face as he hit the glass with a crowbar. I told my mom about the dreams at some point too, and even though she didn't seem too concerned about it, she listened attentively. It was the part about the car that really shook her up. I guess I hadn't told her that last part before. She explained it to me like someone would explain something that is difficult to hear, slowly and by making direct eye contact. Her hand on my lap. Your father doesn't like to talk about this, but when you were very young, you were almost kidnapped. He changed a little bit after the incident, just becoming more cautious, and that's when we started looking for a job here in the city. The other man had it coming, and your dad nearly killed him right there on the spot. Your uncles were there, and they held him back. I'm sure he doesn't like to think back on that day. I had almost graduated high school when I had that dream again for the last time. My dad telling me to cover my face as I looked down toward the red stain from the melted ice cream bar I was eating. My tears falling straight down, some rolling away, some disappearing right into the stain of my yellow dress.